Jack Wilson had always believed that if you worked hard, treated folks right, and stayed the course, you'd earn your piece of peace. For him, that piece looked like a two-story brick house nestled in Brentwood Estates, an upscale neighborhood in Tennessee, with wraparound porches, trimmed hedges, and evening skies that faded soft as velvet. He just moved in, boxes still stacked in the foyer, the moving truck still easing out of the driveway, when he felt that quiet tension in the air. Curtains twitched as he walked past windows. A dog walker paused a beat too long, eyes lingering but lips sealed. No waves, no friendly hellos, just silence wrapped in suspicion. Jack tried to brush it off. Maybe folks around here just kept to themselves. Maybe in time they'd come around. But the very next morning, the front door rattled with a knock sharp enough to unsettle his coffee mug. Jack opened it to find a woman, early 60s, neatly dressed, hair pinned just so. She stood straight as a flagpole and wore a cardigan clipped with a Brentwood Estates HOA badge. "Good morning," she said, her voice crisp. "I'm Linda Whitman, president of the Homeowners Association." Jack offered a polite smile and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. I know who you are," she said, eyes already scanning past him into the house. She handed him a thick stack of papers. "These are the HOA guidelines. Please review them." He flipped through lawn care rules, mailbox specifications, paint color approvals. Standard stuff. But Linda wasn't finished. "We have standards here," she added, nodding toward the truck in the driveway. "I trust that'll be gone by tonight." Jack kept his voice steady. "It'll be gone once I finish unpacking." Linda nodded, but not like someone satisfied, more like someone keeping score. "And just a reminder, trash bins shouldn't go out before 6 a.m. on collection day." "Yours were out last night." "I didn't put them out," Jack replied. "That must have been the previous owners." Her lips pursed. "Well, in the future, please be mindful." Then just like that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind the scent of lavender and control. Jack stood at the door a long moment after it shut. Maybe she was just particular, he thought. Lots of HOA folks are. But deep down, he already knew this wasn't just about trash bins or moving trucks. Something told him this new chapter wouldn't be peaceful. Not yet. In the days that followed, Jack Wilson tried to settle into his new home. He unpacked a little each evening after work, took quiet walks through the neighborhood, and reminded himself that first impressions didn't always tell the whole story. He figured maybe folks just needed time. Maybe the cool silence would melt with a little familiarity. But it didn't. Instead, the silence deepened. Jack began to notice how eyes followed him, not with curiosity, but with something closer to scrutiny. The kind of watching that made the back of your neck tighten. The kind that didn't come with a wave or a smile, just a quiet judgment from behind the screen doors and porch swings. Then came the notices. The first was folded neatly in his mailbox, sealed with the HOA's emblem. Unauthorized vehicle and driveway. It was his own car. The second, lawn maintenance violation. His grass, maybe an inch or two taller than regulation. He'd been meaning to mow it the next morning. The third, exterior lighting not compliant with HOA standards. It was the same porch fixture the previous owners had left behind. Jack read each letter slowly, jaw-tight eyes, scanning the pages for logic, some reasonable explanation. But it didn't take long to understand this wasn't about lights or grass or cars. It was about him. Still, he held his tongue. Maybe if he just followed every rule to the letter, they'd leave him be. But that hope unraveled one evening as he passed a group of neighbors chatting in a nearby driveway. The laughter died the moment they saw him. One woman offered a stiff smile, the kind that disappears as fast as it appears. No one else acknowledged him. Standing among them, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, was Linda Whitman. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The message was loud enough in the hush that followed Jack's passing. That night, he found yet another notice in the mailbox, this time about his trash bins. All bins must be retrieved within 1 hour of collection to preserve the neighborhood's visual integrity. Jack had brought them in that evening, same as everyone else. He knew because he'd seen them. Dozens of them still lined up along the curbs, many, with lids flung open, bags leaning out like tired shoulders. So the next morning he got up early, walked the neighborhood, took photos, trash bins everywhere. Some tipped, some crooked, none with a violation tag, just his. He sent a calm, respectful email to the HOA board attaching the pictures. No reply. 2 days later, there she was again. Linda standing at the foot of his steps. No knock this time. Arms crossed, clipboard clutched tight against her chest like a shield. Jack opened the door, leaning quietly against the frame. "Something I can help you with." She didn't speak right away. Instead, her eyes drifted past him again, always looking in, always inspecting. Finally, she spoke. "This is a formal request to provide proof of ownership of the property," she said, holding out a form. "There have been concerns." Jack didn't move. "Concerns?" he asked softly. "Some of the neighbors have noticed unusual activity, different vehicles, deliveries at odd hours. Some fear the home might be a rental, which would violate HOA regulations." Jack let out a slow, incredulous breath. Not quite a laugh. "You're serious?" Linda's face didn't flinch. "I've lived here less than a month," he said, voice measured. "That's why there have been deliveries, furniture, appliances, and the cars, friends, family, helping me settle in. We have to ensure all homeowners are properly vetted." She replied, fingers tightening around her clipboard. "I'd like you to submit your deed directly. You can check the records," Jack said quietly. "It's public information. I prefer it come from you." Jack studied her face. There wasn't a hint of flexibility in her voice, just cold authority and something sharper underneath. "And if I don't?" Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then I'll be forced to escalate the matter to the HOA board." He watched her a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." With that, he shut the door, not hard but firmly enough to end the conversation. That evening, Jack sat on his porch with a cold beer, the Tennessee air thick and still. Down at the end of his driveway, he saw Linda again. This time she wasn't alone. A man in khakis and a polo shirt stood beside her, jotting notes on a small pad as she pointed toward Jack's home. He didn't have to hear what was said to know what was happening. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was building a case. The next morning, the familiar chime of an email landed in his inbox, notice of violation porch furniture. According to the HOA, his 2 wicker chairs and glass-top table did not conform to the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. Jack leaned back in his chair and exhaled. He'd walked these blocks, seen sun-faded plastic chairs on porches, rusted metal benches half sunk into flower beds. His own setup was clean, tasteful, far from out of place. A day later, another notice: lawn violation, despite freshly cut grass, neatly trimmed hedges, and a yard that would make any landscaper proud. It was clear now Linda wasn't going to stop. So Jack decided to play by her rules with a slight adjustment of his own. That evening, he walked the neighborhood with a notepad in hand. He wrote down everything: broken shutters, overgrown yards, peeling paint, trash bins still out from the day before. He took photos, time-stamped and geotagged, and then he filed his own set of complaints, each one detailed and polite. He didn't expect a warm reply, but what he got, he didn't quite see coming either. The very next day, Linda appeared again, this time with company. Standing beside her was another HOA board member, Stephen Reynolds, a man with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes Jack recognized from the HOA's website. Linda's jaw was tight, her words thin with restraint. "We received your list of complaints," she said. Jack nodded. "Then you know I'm not the only one being held to these so-called standards." Stephen spoke up, clearing his throat. "We appreciate your input, Mr. Wilson, but the HOA determines which matters require action. Not all issues warrant formal notices." Jack folded his arms. "So mine do, but everyone else's don't." Linda's lips pursed. She pulled out another form. "This is your final warning," she said. "Replace the porch furniture. Maintain your lawn at regulation length at all times or fines will be issued. Jack took the paper in silence. Then looking Linda straight in the eyes, he said calm and steady, I've read the bylaws front to back. Nothing in there says I need to replace furniture that's in perfect condition. It's about uniformity, she snapped. No, Jack said, it's about control. Stephen shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Jack looked at him now. Let me ask you, Stephen, if I look like someone else, would we be having this conversation? Stephen hesitated, opened his mouth, closed it again. Jack nodded. That's what I thought. Linda inhaled sharply. If you don't comply, we'll take further action. Jack didn't blink. Then do what you have to do. And with that, Linda turned on her heel and stormed off, Stephen trailing behind. Jack stood on his porch a long while after the violation notice still in his hand. He had called her bluff, but deep down he knew something else too. Linda Whitman wasn't finished. Not yet. Jack Wilson had tried to be patient. He'd tried to be neighborly, but everyone has a limit. By now his mailbox had become a daily source of stress. Each morning brought another letter, another rule bent to corner him, another violation scribbled with passive-aggressive urgency. Linda Whitman, with her crisp cardigans and clipboard diplomacy, had made it clear she wasn't going to stop until she found a way to drive him out. Then one morning a thick envelope arrived. Not from the HOA this time. This one came from a law firm downtown. Jack opened it slowly at the kitchen table, the coffee in his mug cooling beside him. Inside was a formal complaint filed with the Davidson County Housing Authority. The accusations were heavy, even if they were hollow failure to provide proof of ownership, suspicion of fraudulent residency, multiple neighbor concerns about his presence on the property. No names, no signatures, just a pile of legal-sounding nonsense tied together with vague language and a clear motive. Jack stared at the paper, jaw tight. He wasn't surprised, but that didn't dull the sting. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore. It was personal. She wanted him buried in paperwork, cornered by red tape stretched thin until he gave up. That was her strategy. But Jack wasn't going anywhere, not now, not ever. That evening, he made a phone call. Hey, Joe, he said when the line picked up. I need a favor. Joe Martinez had been Jack's real estate attorney for years. A quiet bulldog of a man, calm on the surface but sharp enough to make most folks second-guess their footing. Joe didn't like bullies. And once Jack told him the full story, he didn't hesitate. 3 days later, Jack walked into the Brentwood Estates HOA emergency board meeting with a folder under his arm and purpose in his step. The conference room was full. Neighbors lined the chairs along the walls, murmuring in tight whispers. At the front sat the HOA board. In dead center, like a queen at court, sat Linda Whitman, expression smooth voice, ready. We are here, she began, lifting a stack of printed documents to address the ongoing violations and community concerns regarding Mr. Wilson's residence. I'd like to speak, Jack said, cutting in gently but firmly. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. You'll have your turn to respond after. No, Jack said again, walking calmly to the front. He set his folder on the table. I'm speaking now. A hush rippled through the room. Jack unfolded the first document. This, he said, holding it up for all to see, is the legal deed to my home. Filed, recorded, and indisputable. A few heads turned. Whispers broke out. Some board members exchanged quiet glances. He set the paper down and lifted another. This, he continued, is the purchase agreement for another property in this neighborhood. 214 Oakwood Drive. A flicker passed across Linda's face. Then Jack pulled out the final sheet. And this, he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning, is the deed for 216 Oakwood Drive, Linda's home. The silence was immediate and thick. You could hear the air shift in that room. Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her hands gripped the papers in front of her like lifelines. Jack folded his arms. You might want to check the HOA sale records, Linda. The foreclosure you ignored last month, I was the buyer. Gasps spread across the room like wind through leaves. Jack let the moment settle. So he said, "Tell me, Linda, who's the real trespasser now?" Her composure cracked. For weeks, she had leveraged her authority to make him feel like a stranger. Now she stood exposed in front of the very people she'd once controlled. But Jack wasn't done. He picked up another paper from his folder and laid it gently on the table. "Let's talk about your eviction complaint," he said, tapping the document Linda's law firm had sent. "You accuse me of being an illegal occupant. You filed a report with the county." Linda straightened, trying to gather herself. "As I stated in my report, several residents expressed concern." "Who?" Jack asked. "I'm not at liberty to disclose." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That's funny. I spoke with several neighbors before this meeting. No one remembers expressing anything." More murmurs, more shifting in chairs. The room was turning. "And while we're at it," Jack continued, voice steady, "I submitted multiple documented violations weeks ago. Overgrown yards, broken fences, trash left out for days. Not one of them received so much as a warning." He turned to the board now. "Tell me, do the HOA rules only apply when Linda decides they do?" Stephen Reynolds, the vice president, cleared his throat, clearly rattled. "I think we should pause for a moment to know," Jack said. "This was never about rules. It was about her deciding who belongs." That landed hard. The room fell into a kind of thoughtful silence, the kind that comes when folks realize they've been looking the other way. Linda tried to respond, but her voice faltered. I, I was simply trying to protect the standards of the community." "No," Jack said, eyes never leaving hers. "You were trying to push me out." A quiet voice from the back broke through. "This is a disgrace," someone muttered. Jack turned to see Mr. Holloway, one of the neighborhood's oldest residents, shaking his head in disbelief. "You really tried to evict the man who owns your house?" A few chuckles escaped from the crowd. The tide had turned, and Jack had done it without raising his voice once. But he had one last card to play. "And one more thing," he added, setting the final paper on the table. "Linda, you're behind on your HOA dues." Linda's head snapped up. "That's not true." Jack tapped the document. "I bought your house at auction. That includes your unpaid debt. You owe the HOA over $3,000. Stephen leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Is this accurate?" Linda opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Jack leaned back, folding his hands. "I'd suggest paying it soon. Wouldn't want to violate your own rules." Laughter, low and incredulous, rippled through the room. For the first time, Linda didn't look like the president of anything. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd played too many games and finally lost. She shoved her papers into a folder and stood up fast. "This meeting is adjourned." Her heels clicked hard against the floor as she walked out. But no one followed her. Jack remained seated, still and quiet. Around him, the room stirred, neighbors talking in soft voices, unsure where to look. The air felt different now. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. After Linda Whitman stormed out of the HOA meeting, silence clung to the room like humidity before a storm. No one moved. A few board members shifted in their seats, eyes down papers rustling aimlessly. For a long moment, Jack Wilson simply sat there, quiet, calm, still processing what had just unfolded. Then, like the slow lifting of fog, murmurs began to rise from the neighbors who had come to watch. You could hear disbelief in their voices. "Can you believe this?" one man whispered. "She really tried to evict the wrong guy." Another chuckled softly. Stephen Reynolds, still seated at the board table, cleared his throat and straightened his notes. He looked like a man trying to find footing on ground that no longer felt solid. "Well," he said awkwardly, "I think it's safe to say this situation was mishandled." Jack let out a quiet breath, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "Mishandled," he repeated, not with sarcasm, just wariness. Lisa Hendricks, a middle-aged woman who lived a few doors down, turned in her chair to face him. "Jack," she said gently, "I don't know what to say. I had no idea she was doing all of this." Jack gave her a look, not harsh, just honest. "Didn't you?" Lisa opened her mouth and closed it again. Around the room, a few heads lowered. eyes averted. The truth was they had known. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every notice, but they'd seen how Linda watched him, how the letters came, how the rules always seemed to find his doorstep first. Their silence had been complicity, and now, for the first time, that silence felt heavy. But Jack didn't linger on blame. He turned back to Stephen. "Since we're all here," he said evenly, "why don't we take a real look at HOA violations, not just mine?" Stephen hesitated. Such as Jack pulled out the list he'd been holding for weeks, notes and photos of real infractions across the neighborhood. Broken fences, trash bins left out 2-3 days at a time, lawns that haven't been touched in a month, faded house numbers. These all exist right now, but somehow I was the only one receiving notices. Stephen glanced over the list. His posture changed, less defensive, more resigned. He looked to the other board members. A few shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. "We'll review them properly," Stephen said at last. Jack nodded once. "Good." Then he added with the calm weight of someone who had earned the room's attention. "And while you're at it, I'd like to file a formal complaint against Linda Whitman." Stephen blinked. For what grounds? Jack looked around the room. Harassment, filing false HOA violations, using her position to target a homeowner for personal reasons. Murmurs stirred again. Lisa leaned forward. "Do we even have the authority to remove her?" Stephen sighed. "The board can vote for removal if an officer is found abusing their role." Jack leaned forward slightly. "Then let's vote." A pause. Lisa raised her hand first, seconded, then slowly, one by one, hands began to lift. Neighbors who had once stood by silently now raised their arms, voting to remove the very woman they had allowed to reign unchecked for years. It was quiet, it wasn't dramatic, but it was final. Stephen glanced around the table. "By majority vote," he said, voice steady, "Linda Whitman is officially removed as president of the Brentwood Estates HOA, effective immediately." Jack nodded, gathered his papers, and stood. "Well," he said, not unkindly, "that was productive." Laughter, genuine this time, broke out in soft waves. Neighbors smiled, a few even clapped lightly. As Jack made his way toward the door, he could feel their eyes on him, not with suspicion, but with something else, respect, maybe even gratitude. They had learned something that night about fairness, about how power should never be used to isolate or intimidate, but most of all about what happens when someone stands up and says enough. But not everyone had learned. Because outside, waiting at the edge of Jack's driveway the very next morning, stood Linda Whitman, shoulders square, expression tight. And this time she wasn't alone. Her husband, Richard, a tall, gray-haired man in his 70s, stood beside her with a tired scowl. Jack stepped onto the porch, arm crossed. "Something I can help you with?" Linda's voice was stiff. "I want to talk about the sale of my home." Jack had expected this. He'd been waiting. "I'm not selling," he said simply. "I've lived there 32 years, she said, her voice quieter now, but no less determined. Jack tilted his head. "And yet you never paid off the fees tied to it." Richard spoke up now. "We're prepared to offer you a fair price." Jack leaned against the porch railing. "Define fair." Linda's patience wore thin. "The same amount you paid at auction." Jack let out a short laugh. "That's not how real estate works. You lost your house due to unpaid debt. I legally bought it. If you want it back, you'll need to pay market value." Her hands clenched. "That's outrageous. You're just trying to make a profit." Jack's expression didn't change. "No, Linda, I'm treating you the way you treated me." Silence fell heavy between them. After a beat, Richard sighed. How much? Jack looked at the house, thought for a moment. Given the location, the debt attached, in the current market, $450,000. Linda's jaw dropped. "That's ridiculous." Jack shrugged. "Then I guess you'll have to find somewhere else to live." For a moment, the mask cracked. Real panic flickered in her eyes. This wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't a hearing or a warning letter. It was real. Richard rubbed a hand over his face. We'll consider it. Jack nodded. Take your time. As they turned to go, Linda hesitated. She looked back at him, and there was something in her expression, maybe not remorse, but the beginning of recognition. A quiet realization that she'd never truly been in control. Jack let the moment settle, then spoke softly. Linda, next time you judge someone before you know them. He gestured toward her old house. Remember where it got you. She didn't reply, just turned and walked away. And for the first time, Jack didn't feel like a stranger on his own street. A few days after Linda and Richard walked away from Jack's porch, the for sale sign appeared out front of 216 Oakwood Drive. It went up quietly, no announcement, no conversations, just a small white post planted firmly in the lawn like a flag of surrender. Neighbors noticed, of course. Folks in places like Brentwood Estates always noticed, but no one said much. Maybe out of awkwardness, maybe out of shame. Or maybe they simply didn't know what to say to someone like Linda Whitman anymore. She hadn't tried to buy the house back. Not at Jack's price. No bank would give her the loan she needed, not with unpaid fees and a foreclosure on record. The damage had already been done by her own hand. One morning before sunrise, Jack watched from his living room window as a moving truck pulled into her driveway. It was still dark when she and Richard began loading it themselves. No professional movers, no send-off. Just two aging silhouettes carrying boxes into a trailer while the rest of the neighborhood slept. By mid-morning, they were gone. No goodbyes, no final words. And just like that, the house that once held power over Jack now sat empty. But Brentwood Estates wasn't the same place it had been when Jack arrived. Without Linda in charge, the HOA board began functioning differently, more quietly, more reasonably. Notices were still sent, but they made sense now. Trash bins that sat for days, fences falling into disrepair, actual violations. And they went to everyone, not just the new face in town. Something else shifted too. The neighbors. Some of them still avoided Jack's eye, unsure of what to say or how to act now that the truth had been dragged into the light. But others slowly, cautiously began to break the silence they'd once wrapped around themselves like a blanket. It started small, a wave during a morning walk, a nod across the street, a quick thanks for trimming the shared hedge. And then one crisp Saturday afternoon as the leaves began to turn, Jack heard a knock on his door. Not a sharp one this time. Gentle, hesitant. It was Lisa Hendricks holding a plate of chocolate chip cookies. She shifted awkwardly on his porch, eyes down for a beat before meeting his. I know it's late, she said, but welcome to the neighborhood. Jack looked at the plate, then at her. A soft smile touched his face. Took you long enough. Lisa chuckled, a little embarrassed. Yeah, it did. Jack took a bite. Sweet, a little dry, but somehow it tasted better than it should have. Because it came with something more important than sugar, it came with acknowledgement. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the porch lights blinked on one by one across the neighborhood, Jack sat in his wicker chair. Yes, still the same one Linda had tried to have removed. He listened to the breeze rustle through the trees, watched a kid pedal past on a bike too big for his frame, and thought about how much had changed, not just for him, for them. Linda had spent years building her authority on paper rules, on fear, on silence. She thought her power came from title and tenure, from being the loudest voice in the room. But she'd been wrong. Real power isn't loud. It's steady. It's knowing who you are, even when someone tries to tell you otherwise. It's standing firm, not because you want to fight, but because you won't be pushed. It's the quiet dignity of claiming your place, your peace, and saying, this is mine and I'm not going anywhere. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. He didn't stoop to insults. He just told the truth. And it was enough. Sometimes the world doesn't change in sweeping movements. Sometimes it shifts inch by inch. Through one quiet act of courage, one neighbor baking cookies, one meeting where somebody finally speaks up. And as the porch light glowed warm around him, Jack felt something settle inside. Not victory, not vengeance, just peace. the kind he'd always pictured when he dreamed of that house in Brentwood Estates. And now, after everything, it was finally his, completely, quietly, rightfully his. The weeks rolled on quietly after Linda Whitman packed up and left Oakwood Drive. Her house, once the command post of neighborhood scrutiny, sat vacant under a slate blue sky. For sale signs flapped in the autumn breeze, the front porch empty now, except for a sagging flower pot and a fading memory of her control. Jack Wilson didn't gloat. That wasn't his way. He just went on living. Mowing his lawn with care, waving to the mailman, tending to the hedges out front. Not because the HOA required it, but because he loved the place. He always had, even when the neighborhood hadn't quite loved him back. Without Linda pulling the strings, the HOA began to function the way it should have all along. Notices were fair. Complaints were handled with reason and not revenge. The board meetings grew shorter and quieter, with Stephen Reynolds taking a more balanced approach. He still carried his clipboard, but now he listened. And the neighbors? Well, they began to change too. The ones who once turned their backs now nodded as they passed. Some even stopped to chat nothing deep, just the neighborly stuff. Weather, lawn tips, which grocery store had the best deals on coffee. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't instant. But it was real. Some folks were still stiff, their guilt wrapped tight around them like a scarf they couldn't quite take off. And Jack understood that. Silence has a way of settling into people, especially when it's been kept for so long. It takes time to unlearn it. But change was creeping in, small as it was. Jack saw it one Thursday morning when an older couple across the street brought in his trash bins after a storm blew them halfway down the block. He saw it when a kid from the corner house asked to help rake his leaves just because. He saw it in the way the air around him no longer felt like it had weight. One evening, as the sun turned the sky to melted gold, Lisa Hendricks stopped by again. This time with no cookies, just a folding chair in one hand and a tired smile on her face. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Jack smiled. "Sure, long day." She let out a sigh and unfolded her chair beside his. "Feels like we've all had a long season." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the wind stir the trees. Then she turned to him. "You know, when you first moved in, I told myself I wasn't part of the problem. I wasn't the one writing those letters. I wasn't the one knocking on your door." Jack didn't say anything. Just let her speak. "But I saw it," she continued quietly. "I saw how she treated you. And I didn't say a word. I told myself it wasn't my place." She looked down at her hands. "But it was." Jack nodded slowly. "Takes courage to say that." Lisa let out a breath. "Just wish I'd had it sooner." He turned to her, voice gentle. "Better late than never." She looked up, eyes damp but steady. "Thank you, Jack." He gave a small smile. "For what?" "For staying. For not letting her push you out. For reminding all of us who we should have been." Jack didn't respond right away. He let her words linger there, honesty sinking in like roots. "Some things are worth standing for," he said softly, "even when it's uncomfortable." And in that moment, the porch didn't feel quite so quiet. It felt shared. A few days later, the house at 216 Oakwood finally sold. A young couple with a baby on the way moved in. Jack made sure to stop by with a welcome basket. Nothing fancy, just coffee, bread, and a handwritten note that read, "Glad you're here. If you need anything, I'm just across the street." The husband shook his hand. The wife smiled wide. The baby gurgled on her hip. And Jack felt something shift again. The neighborhood was still learning, still healing, but it was moving in the right direction. Linda, from what Jack later heard, had ended up in a smaller home across town. Word was she hadn't spoken much about Brentwood Estates since leaving, maybe out of shame, maybe because she still believed she'd been in the right. Some people hold on to their other stories even when the truth is staring them in the face. But whether or not she learned her lesson, the neighborhood had. Because when you spend years trying to control others, when you weaponize rules and wrap yourself in power like armor, it doesn't protect you forever. Sooner or later, it all unravels. and you find yourself standing in a driveway you used to own facing someone that you once tried to belittle. Only now the balance has shifted, and grace is being offered to you from the very place you tried to burn. Jack never raised his voice. He never slammed a door or filed a lawsuit out of spite. He just stood firm. And in doing so, he reminded everyone around him that decency isn't complicated, it's just rare. But when it shows up and stands its ground, it changes everything, even the places that once felt unwelcome. As fall gave way to winter in Brentwood Estates, the neighborhood settled into a softer rhythm. Jack Wilson's porch light still glowed in the evenings, casting a warm circle onto the sidewalk below. The wicker chairs, once deemed non-compliant, remained exactly where they belonged. And now and then a neighbor would join him, a cup of coffee in hand, conversations filled with laughter, memory, and the kind of connection that takes time to build. No more letters appeared in Jack's mailbox. No more knocks with rules dressed as warnings. Just peace, the kind he'd always pictured when he dreamed of owning that home. Linda Whitman was gone. Her name faded from HOA meeting notes, her presence quietly erased from the place she once controlled. In her absence, something unexpected had begun to grow. Not just fairness, but humility, awareness. Neighbors began to look each other in the eye again. Some apologized. Others just showed up. One chilly morning, a boy on a scooter slowed at Jack's driveway. "Hey, Mr. Wilson," he said, shy but cheerful. "Mom said thanks for helping with the fence." Jack smiled. "Tell her she's welcome." And as the boy zipped away, Jack stood still for a moment, taking it in, the crisp air, the scent of pine, the faint sound of leaves rustling down the street. He'd earned this, not through anger or revenge, but through something steadier, something stronger. Some people believe power lives in titles, rules, and the fear they can stir in others. But real strength isn't loud. It doesn't seek control. It doesn't isolate. Real strength is quiet, unwavering, and rooted in the truth. It's the courage to stand firm without lashing out, the grace to respond without bitterness, the wisdom to know your worth even when others try to question it. Jack didn't need to shout to be heard. He just needed to stay and let the truth do the rest. If this story spoke to you even just a little, I'd love to hear what it stirred in your heart. Feel free to share your thoughts, your reflections, or even your own story down in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, real, human, and full of meaning, you're warmly invited to subscribe. No pressure, no push, just a quiet place for the kind of stories that remind us who we are and what still matters.